Well, hey, everybody. Nicole Sauce here. We're going live today to record the podcast, and I thought I would just log in and let you all get logged in and do the announcement on social while we're doing that. I hope everybody's having a great Monday. It's the Monday before Christmas, and this is my last full show that I am recording. I do have an interview show with John Willis tomorrow that we're recording, and that'll go out on Wednesday's podcast. So that's fun, but it is what it is. So I've been like building up in my head the recording of this episode all weekend long as I'm like, it's got to be a good one. It's the last one, right? I mean, you'll hear from me. Good morning, Jen Hill. You'll hear from me. I'll explain in the show what's happening. Hey, Tom. Welcome. I'll explain what's happening, when we get into the podcast episode, just as far as content for the rest of the year, because there will be some shows next week. And I was going to do a bunch of, hi, Kira. I was going to do a bunch of replay episodes around my three things: setting your goals, making your strategic plan, changing your life, taking control of that thing. And as I was looking through episodes, I realized some things. So how we're going to approach that next week, it's going to be a little bit different. Don't worry. There will be podcasts, but next week I'm taking time off. In fact, today's really my last official work day before Christmas on the books. But I've realized that I'm basically working until Friday. It's just I won't be producing content except for the live show tomorrow through Friday. So there are other things that I feel need to be done for the businesses foundationally to finish and go through the week after that when I get to remodel my bathroom. Woohoo! So I'm really looking forward to the remodeling of the bathroom. If anybody feels like it, you can share on social that we're live. I'm going to copy this link real quick and put it over on the Telegram group for Living Free in Tennessee, just so folks know we're live. I'm going to say recording live today. It's the big word of the year episode. It is the big word of the year episode. That's how fast I typed that. I wonder if there's any typos in there. Oh, wow. A miracle has happened. A miracle has happened. Can you talk about when you have too many choices and how to decide with some of those replays? Yes. That's actually a big part of it because we all run into this. In fact, we're going to address some of that on the show. So I'm not going to star that for answering later because I just answered it. But I am going to, that's the whole thing. I was going through and looking at how they were organized. And yeah, there's going to be a whole different approach, I believe, as we get into that. So it's part of the fun. Okay, you guys ready to record this thing? I just put out on social that we're live. We're going to record. If this is the first time you've seen me record a live podcast, I give a 5-second pause. I count with my fingers, and then I start the podcast episode. If I make, like last week, I made a mistake and had to start it again. I couldn't say my own tagline. I don't know why. That happens. You get to see the mistakes live. And then we'll record the episode. If you have questions or comments along the way that you want me to see, put the first couple words in all caps at least. And I probably won't be looking at those other than to star them because usually I read the comments as we're going. This time, because of the nature of the topic of this episode, I may or may not look at those until the end. And then I'll probably stay on after the show and answer those questions. I'll stay on as long as you want. I have a little extra time today because there's no choir practice at 7 p.m. So usually I'm like sprinting on Monday to get to choir class. I got to get out of here by 6 to get to choir by 7. And the last Monday and this Monday, I haven't had that, but we have Christmas coffee orders. So that's a little busy. Anyway, if you're new to the channel, do go ahead and give me a subscribe and hit the bell button and all the good things if you like what you hear. With that, we're going to go into the recording of the actual audio podcast. Let's do this. Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, December 19th, 2022. This is episode 673 of Living Free in Tennessee, and it is our last Monday show for 2022. And because of that, I spent a little extra time putting the show notes together. I spent a lot of time over the week reflecting, and it is time for the big reveal of the word of the year. I usually do this as my last episode going into the break, but we have a live show scheduled tomorrow, and this is the last official show that I'm by myself. And I thought, well, we'll do it one show early. And of course, you guys know the tradition. We'll talk about the whole schedule as we go into the show, but there will be content coming out next week. So today, in keeping with tradition, I will share with you my word of the year, why it was chosen, what I hope it will mean. And we all know that what I hope it will mean is never the lesson I actually learn. But I go in hopeful, guys. I go in hopeful. And that's part of the thing that happens when you choose a word of the year is you think you know what you're doing, and then it teaches you something different, but usually it's good. So that's going to be this show's episode. I'm also going to cover schedule for next week. And we will then, after the Wednesday podcast this week, that's lights out until around January 2nd or so when we start back. Monday is January 2nd that week. That's officially when I start back, and I may put it off until January 3rd and do a Monday show on a Tuesday. Oh, no, that'll be Tuesday Live with Jack Spirko. So won't do that. I might do a Monday show on a Wednesday and go from there. So don't you love it when you're like hearing me record the podcast and you hear notices? I just had I realized I try to log out of everything so we don't get like Skype calls in the middle of this, but every so often I forget. And I was still up on Telegram because before this show started, which I'm also recording live, I put it out on social that we were recording live. Speaking of the live stream schedule this week, tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Central Time, I'm going to be live with John Willis from Special Operations Equipment and Ed Hubble from the Iridium Group or iridiumsolutions.ca. I'm really excited about this discussion. It's actually out of my comfort zone to talk with Ed. Not that I'm afraid to talk with Ed, but it's going to be topics I'm less well-versed in, which is really good for me. It actually usually makes for a pretty good show because I ask questions because I don't know. And then that's more informative for people. So be sure to tune in tomorrow, 12:30 p.m. Central, live with John Willis from Special Operations Equipment and Ed Hubble from the Iridium Group. If you want to check them out, it's iridiumsolutions.ca. Before we jump into the first segment of today's show, I want to thank today's show sponsor. You guys know who it is because it's Monday. It's Paul Wheaton from Permies.com and Wheaton Labs. Paul Wheaton has done something pretty cool. He's developed a truly passive greenhouse that can grow things in the winter with no additional heating. So you don't have to put additional heat in, which many of us who have sort of regenerative greenhouses, we are having to heat at night, especially in the winter. Well, he's figured out a way around that. And not only that, it doesn't overheat in the summer. So that got my attention because greenhouses here overheat in the summer every single time. How's it possible? Well, he has for sale a movie talking all about his passive greenhouse system. You can stream it for $19. You can buy the low resolution version of it for $25, or you can buy the HD version for $35. That's over at permies.com/link/LFTN. Living Free in Tennessee. He tried to make it easy so you could get straight there and I could say something on the show audioly. I've also put the link in the show notes. You can watch the Truly Passive Greenhouse movie. And if you haven't built a greenhouse yet, that might be really worth the investment because if you can figure out how to not have to heat your greenhouse, that makes a huge difference if you're planning to actually, in fact, use it to keep your stuff from freezing through the winter. So thank you to Paul Wheaton for sponsoring today's show. I also want to remind you, if you want to get a question in for the Q&A or send a fortune or just send comments, you can do that via email. That's the best way. If you say things to me in chat, I forget them. If you say them in email, they become filed into my filing system and they're likely to come back in a show, right? That's Nicole, Nicole, at livingfreeintennessee.com, or go over to livingfreeintennessee.com, click on contact and fill out the form, and that will come straight to me. With that, it's time for our first segment of today's show. That's Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is where we talk about using what you store, storing what you use, the foundational concept of how we build stability into our lives in a different way than just financial stability is that. And it frees up time. It brings a lot of benefits. I went over a number of them in the Power Pantry workshop I did in partnership with the Live Free Academy. Anyway, this is what's going on in my pantry this week. It hasn't been a big pantry week. Well, it kind of has. It's been a lot of work this week, but that's just because my pantry includes my freezers. Every nook and cranny of my deep freezers are stuffed with stuff. And here's why. One, the cow arrived. Usually the cow arrives in December, but it arrived in November this year. That's okay. Last year it didn't arrive till January, so I was like really set. That's one thing that happened. Two, we processed 5 sheep. We sold 3 sheep. Half of one of those sold 3 sheep is still in my freezer. In fact, I need to circle back with the person and see if he still wants it, because I know people who drive down where he lives and we could send it down. And the way that's packaged is all in one package, and that package has to have a big space, a big enough space for it to go into. Okay. Then my neighbor came over and he was like, "Hey man, I shot a deer. Do you want the meat?" And I said, yes. And that was the day of the Power Pantry webinar. And I didn't have time to process it. So I said, "Hey, Nighthawk, come down here, skin and quarter this deer, put it in the outdoor fridge. I'll deal with it later." But I'm not going to say no to free meat, right? And then like 5 minutes later, his buddy who he'd been hunting with came over and said, "Hey, Nicole, do you want this deer too?" And I actually paused for a second. I almost said no, because I was like, self, when you get overcommitted, self, you get sick. Self, you just had COVID. Maybe you don't want to process 2 deer in one day. Self, don't be an idiot. Say yes. And I said, "Yes, please." And then I said, "Nighthawk, would you like to quarter 2 deer?" And he did. And of course, I don't get all the meat to myself. I have, I'll divide it up among the neighbors. In fact, some of my neighbors haven't gotten their venison pack, but I just finished vacuum packing all of the frozen ground, because I pre-freeze the ground in shapes, and then I vacuum seal it. Even though my chamber vac will do it without me doing that, I do that for a reason, because I wanted a specific shape for storage in my in my freezer, and the chamber vac tends to flatten it out some. So I did that and had it in Ziplocs and decided I didn't need to deal with it until I had a little more time in my schedule from Christmas rush. But this week, we're getting down to single digits. We're going to be below freezing for 3 or 4 days. And I know for those of you from the northern part of the States, that doesn't sound like too scary at all. But here, we're not built for that. So especially the single digits really hit the homestead hard, because this house was not ready to do that. And every year, it's a little bit more ready, but it's still not ready. So what I have is a commercial ice cream freezer outside, and I have a fridge outside, both of which should not get too cold and still be operating, because they're not insulated for that. They're not built to be garage freezers or whatever they call those. And so I wanted them cleared out, turned off before it got too cold. Last night was the first night it was too cold, although it was not single digits, because I've had it happen where I leave things on outside and then the freeze goes away and the freezer comes up to normal temperature because it broke, right? We don't want that. So it's better to turn it off. I have stored this commercial freezer outside for years. And, one of these years it's probably going to break, but it's super durable, but it's never been on when it was that cold. So I had to empty it out and put all that stuff somewhere. So right now I've managed to Tetris in 2 deer, 2.5 sheep, and all of the extra workshop food that was left over from the Food Forest workshop, which wasn't a ton, plus thises and that's that were in the outdoor fridge freezer. And it's all in my deep freezers that are in the prepper pantry that will not get that cold. It took me 2 days. It took me 2 days and some cold hands. And as a result, also the freezer in my inside house is stuffed. And my fridge is really full of things that are defrosting that I'm going to cook this week. So that's a lot of moving stuff around. And that's just because I usually store in those deep freezers in the prepper pantry. I use the ice cream freezer as a backup. So like if we're processing something, I'll plug it in, get some ice in there. You can hose it out, which is really cool. And so I can just put like a whole pig in there, or I can put a whole bunch of chickens in there to chill them. And it's a great appliance for that. And it cools down faster than a normal like consumer grade freezer, deep freezer. So that's really nice, but we don't want to break that asset. And I had done the lazy thing and decided to put the sheep in there because it was easy to bring them out because there was lots of extra room. But yeah, it was a big deal, man. It was a big deal. So that's a huge relief. The second thing is that we're almost through the potatoes I grew last year. I ended up with about half a bushel of potatoes. I'm a primarily ketogenic eater, so I don't eat a lot of potatoes, but I have them at Thanksgiving. I usually have them at Christmas. Mashed potatoes are not on my menu this week, but I want to leave, 5 or 10 of them are out. So they from their eyes, they start growing, and then you end up being able to plant those, right? You cut them up into pieces and plant them. And the idea is every year you replant your potatoes so you don't have to buy seed potatoes. So that's in the offing. And I also had some potatoes I got at the farmer's market. I'll look those over as well. What's happening is I'm storing root vegetables down at base camp in the basement, and it's warmer there than in my prepper pantry. So things are ripening faster. Over the break, I may find a way to undo that situation. I was planning to pull the roof off the prepper pantry and redo it. I'm not doing that now because of some changes to the approach at the Holler homestead, what I'm going to do with the house long term. I didn't want to put all that work in and then take all that work out a year later. So it looks like I can just shelf up in there for the rest of the year, and we will continue to look sideways at the roof of that thing. It doesn't leak, but it's, it's a situation where you can just, you know how it is, right? Like it's going to leak at some point, and it's not ideal, and but it works. And that's how it is on the homestead, right? Like sometimes you're like, that works right now and it's not broken and I'm not going to touch it. The end of year restock is done. It was actually fairly light. I went to Sam's Club to get like paper towels and toilet paper was on the list. And I looked at the rest of my list and it was like a bunch of thises and that. So I needed rubber bands for my hair, which are $1 at the Dollar Tree, $1.25 at the Dollar Tree. And I looked over at, I needed some Neosporin, like a package of Band-Aids. I like to cycle the Band-Aids through, but you don't want to store Band-Aids for too long in the wrong way, which my house is the wrong way. It gets very humid here in the summer. I didn't want to do that and then end up with bad Band-Aids. So I only keep a certain number of things on hand. So most of my list was onesie, twosie things, and I knocked it out yesterday. The only thing left on it at this point are things like, I really like high quality balsamic vinegars, and I can't just get those at Walmart. I have to be in a specialty store for it, or I need to order them online. And it's not that desperate because I have a few bottles left, but they are on the restock list. And I figure I'll be out and about. I'm traveling to California in January. Like I'll be out and about seeing things when I do that. And at that point, I'll probably, if I see a specialty store, buy the one on my trip. So there's nothing urgent or necessary on the list, and it was kind of nice to have that be that easy this time, because sometimes the quarterly restock is like the whole truck is full. It takes me an entire afternoon if I don't do it by mail, and the whole point of doing this with my pantry is to save time, right? So it was super easy, and I got a stocking knocked out that I wanted to buy gifts for as well. Spent like $20 on that and it was done, so that worked out well as well. Christmas dinner is coming from the pantry this year, not buying anything special for it, not even heavy whipping cream, which is I usually would, because I get a half gallon of milk a week right now that I put in my coffee. I'd rather have heavy whipping cream, but right now I haven't heard an answer back if they have heavy whipping cream. At the time of year when the grass isn't as fresh and springy, you get I think a lower cream count in your milk from your cattle. So this time of year there's going to be less cream than in the early spring. And so when I asked if I could get heavy whipping cream last time, the answer was no. And so I'm hoping that has changed, but we will see. We will see. If not, I'll just keep asking it once a month, because what I want to do is transition from half gallon of milk a week to a pint or 2 pints of heavy whipping cream a week. And I noticed that they have 1 cup containers. They have like half a pint. I'm like, no, I need at least a pint. I'm willing to bring a jar every year and switch every week and switch it out. But it is what it is. So I'm suffering, in air quotes, suffering through milk in my coffee, which isn't quite as good as just a little bit of heavy cream. But steamed milk is good too. It's fine. And it's delicious straight off the cow. So Christmas dinner from the pantry is going to be leg of lamb. I know you're not surprised to hear that because we processed lamb, right? So there'll be a leg of lamb. I'm going to roast some turnips and carrots, which may not sound super special, but I really like roasted root vegetables. I might even go out and dig up some Jerusalem artichokes for that. And then I'll put some handmade cheese in there and garlic and onions and do a bake. It's actually more of a root bake, but that's a recipe I actually learned from somebody who I met in Nashville a long time ago, and it was delicious. She used beets. I don't have beets. I have turnips, so I'm going to use turnips. Although I have freeze-dried beets. I might try it with some freeze-dried beets. We'll see. And then I'll do a bit of a charcuterie platter, mostly with things I've pickled here. So handmade stuff here, maybe some of my cheeses that I've made. We'll see how those are looking. And we're doing it Holler Neighbor style. So I was prepared to cook dinner at my house, and then we went out to dinner with the Eversoles last night, who live at base camp, and they invited us over to their dinner. They're having, a whole meal, and it's, dinner in the middle of the day, dinner for Christmas. And I said, well, heck, I'll just bring mine down there. And so I'm not doing a lot of sides like I normally would because they have sides too. And I have seen Tracy cook. So I don't want to overdo it. So I'm bringing those 3 things, my 3 things. And then we're really in purge mode here, as like the cool thing about this year is the Holler reached a tipping point where we went from catch up to grow up. Basically, we're not all caught up, but we're mostly caught up, and we are improving things as we go and doing things the right way as we go, rather than the keep it from dying way. Like the no-kill list is a thing, and the no-kill list is important, but when you get stuff sort of on an even keel, then you can move forward. And part of moving forward is that a lot of people have left a lot of stuff here over the last 30 years. And a lot of that's been purged from the property, but a lot of it hasn't. And so we're in full-on purge mode, both for that stuff and in the prepper pantry. 5 years ago, I was not a ketogenic eater. I had a totally different dietary approach to life. And I have a couple places in my pantry where stuff has been around for a long time, and I'm getting rid of some of the things I know, like it's just never going to get eaten by people here. And I've just been giving it away. Or I have specialty kitchen appliances for processing the things, right, that I'm never going to eat. And so I don't need to keep them. So part of that has meant like I sold the wheat grinder that was here to somebody who does eat bread, because while I do store some wheat berries, which is unground wheat, right? It's like before it's ground because it stores better that way. I never need very much. Like if I do 1 loaf of bread, I'm going to need 2 to 3 cups, and I don't want to have it just sitting around ground. Or more often what I'm doing is I've decided to make gravy with wheat as the thickener, and I need a tablespoon. And that's not very much. So like having this giant appliance dedicated to grinding wheat makes 0 sense. Now I used to bake bread all the time, right? And if I did that, then I needed to have a way to grind the wheat, and the fresh ground wheat was way better tasting than the stuff from the store, obviously. So that's gone. And that's what I mean by purging things. So we're purging things that I have had here too. And I've always had this appliance, or not appliance, but like this bin in my prepper pantry of things that I don't use a lot in the kitchen, like maybe once a year. In there is like I have a device that it's spring loaded, and it has a plus shaped blade on the bottom, and it's got a little curve, and you can put it on top of a chestnut, and it cuts the chestnut without cutting your hands, which is way better than using a knife on chestnuts, right? And now my dog thinks I'm talking about her chestnut, haha. And Mom made chestnuts while she's here in November, and we couldn't find the thing, and it was in that box. So part of the purge goal is that box will no longer exist. If I need it in the kitchen, it fits in the kitchen, and that means there's stuff in the kitchen that I never use that is going out of the kitchen. So that's also part of the purge. So it's both in the pantry and just the stuff purge. This is something that people who get into homesteading and preparedness were always thinking, well, I might need that someday. And the problem with I might need that someday is twofold. One, stuff goes bad if you don't maintain it, and you have too much stuff, you're not going to maintain it. And where I live, we have a pretty humid environment. So what that means is that it's going to get moldy, and moldy stuff is not cool. That's one. Two, it takes up space for the things that you should be making space for. And mentally, that means you're not making space for the most important things. If you don't do that, you don't move forward. It can actually hold you back to save the money of having to replace the thing. And that's more of a poverty mindset, right? Now, that doesn't mean just throw everything away willy-nilly all the time. That's also going to put you in a position where you spend way too much money. But if you learn to prioritize what to keep, it does empower you. And I speak to you as a person who has a tendency to keep too many things. So I've really been focused on keeping fewer things, having the things I like and use, arranging them in my house from a permaculture perspective, where the things I use the most are the things easiest to access. And you're like in the back of the cabinet, it's going to be that chestnut thing. Actually, it's in a drawer, but it's in the back of the drawer because I only use it, at this time of year for a month or two, and then it's going to go away until chestnuts are in season again. But that is one of the things I'm keeping. So there's lots of crap, and it's just leaving the homestead. I'm putting up a picture. Some of the things we use are just in terrible shape. I have 15-year-old shovels that are done. And, Carrie actually tried to maintain some of them. I appreciate your efforts, Carrie. They're done. Like, I have a shovel that's not even pointy anymore. It's been my favorite shovel for years, but it's like it's hit so many rocks that it has 2 points actually, because it's had a chip taken out of the middle of it from use, which is pretty funny. So those sorts of things, as I identify them and can afford to replace them, I'm getting rid of the many crappy ones and getting one good one. So I just got one good shovel, and I'm getting rid of 3 or 4 shovels now. And I had this talk with Tactical. I'm like, I put them in a pile over there. There's about to be a picture of the shovels. And I have this like twisty weed thing that takes weeds with tap roots out that I've never used, that was here when I got here, that's in totally good shape. Never going to use it. Why is it here? So that's going out too. Anyway, that's the pantry update. A lot of it is the pantry purge. That's right. Next up, we have the weekly shopping report from Joe. And this is just something that he started in 2020, where he wanted to record what prices were like and what shopping was like, because we've had so many, like I've grown up with the expectation that you go to the store and the things that you want to buy are there. And that's been that way my whole life. And I'm 50 until about 3 years ago. And then it stopped happening. Sure, they ran out of canning stuff every summer at Walmart the whole time I've lived here, but it was predictable, and it's become a whole lot less predictable. So I think this segment's kind of fun. So here's what Joe has to say to us. He says, the first stop was Walgreens for vitamins. Stock was mostly good. There was only one large size vitamin D, so we had to choose another size in order to use the buy one, get one free deal. Food City was next. Dry cat food was very, very limited. But they had a couple of 16-pound bags of Meow Mix. They had lots of Frisky boxed cans, so we added some of those too. Dollar Tree was next. We found some large 9 Lives cans in there for the first time in months and grabbed a few. Not all of our cats like those, though. The frozen food coolers were really sparse. Most of the drink coolers are back to being empty. I think it's the worst I've seen it. The health aisle was beginning to look picked over again, but most other areas looked well stocked, and there were less unrefrigerated canned drinks. Both of the 2 lines were open and extended back into the aisles. And that's not a surprise, guys, because it was the weekend before Christmas. Same at Home Depot. I ran in to check the price of a 2x4x8. It is still $3.75. I did not look over any other areas, but it was fairly crowded as spending season is at its peak. Aldi was last. We got a few extra things in case we decide to not go shopping next week, because obviously you don't want to go shopping next week. It is Christmas Day and the day after Christmas. Chaos! Shopping crowds were good, so it may not be so bad. We'll likely try to go. We found that we wanted what we wanted, including heavy cream. I didn't see any notable holes, but lettuce and grapes didn't look as good as usual. Untainted regular gasoline, that's gasoline that's ethanol free, was $3.99. So that is the report from Joe. Thanks for putting that together. Next up, we have the frugality tip from Margot. So Margot sends a lot of these in, guys, but if you want to send a frugality tip in that you think would be a good fit for the show, just email it to me, Nicole at Living Free in Tennessee. I read them in order that I get them. I have about 3 in backlog right now. So if you've got one, send it to me. Or if you think of one over Christmas, send it to me. So the frugality tip is this. This is one of the most valuable things to me, and that's my time and sanity. For your holiday menu, plan it out a month or so in advance. Too late. She probably sent this a month ago. Gather the things you need to start cooking and cook them early and freeze them. So something like mashed potatoes, you could do that. You could cook them and freeze them. And then for the holiday meal, you can take it out the day before the thaw. Make sure you have all the things you need the week before the holiday so you don't have to go to the store, because that's a huge waste of time the week before. I didn't make rolls, for example, this year. I bought them and put them in the freezer. FYI, Hawaiian rolls freeze and thaw very well. So save your sanity during the holidays and keep a stocked pantry. That's a really good way to do it. Mashed potatoes are one of the things I've always cooked. Well, not always, but often cooked in advance. I've also been panic cooking those a time or two at Thanksgiving. Full confession. But mashed potatoes are something you can make. You can freeze them. You can put them in your crock pot with a crock pot liner and freeze them to shape if you can get it back out of the crock pot liner once it's frozen. That's a trick, by the way. And then put that whole thing with the crock pot liner right back in there and just heat it in your crock pot the day of, and it's done. And it means you don't have to peel the potatoes. If you peel them, I don't peel them. Boil them, mash them, mix them, and serve them. And that's a whole 20-minute thing, 10 to 20-minute thing that you don't have to do the day of. So I love that frugality tip. Frugality doesn't always mean you're saving money. Sometimes it means you're saving time. And saving time and having sanity, I think, is a great idea. Okay, next up, we have Operation Independence. This is where we talk about building local ongoing revenue into our lives. And I think I originally put this here because as part of my life strategic plan, it is important to have a limited number of places that you are focusing so that you move forward in life. If you try to focus on all 10 things you need to improve at once, you won't get it done. But if you choose 3 of them, the 3 most important to do first, and do those, then you can mark them off the list and add more in, right? We'll talk about that in the My 3 Things series. So one of my things that was a huge weak spot when I started the podcast in 2016 was that my finances were not where they needed to be. I had been working on, I had already come to that point that we come to, not all of us in life, but many of us who are stupid and don't spend right and don't finance right, where I realized I had a bunch of debt. I realized how much interest I was paying every month on that debt. I realized how much of my time it took to make money that was essentially going to nothing. It was going to impulse buying, basically. It was going to the inability to plan. It was going to a need for instant gratification. It was going to all sorts of things besides what it needed to go for. And I freaked out, cried, did all the things. And then I was like, okay, well, there's only one way to deal with this. And I started taking on that challenge. Well, there are 2 sides to that equation. One is the spending and saving side, and the other is the earning side. And I realized if I have more local ongoing revenue, it's more stable, because I was dependent on large contracts at that time that I have a limited number of hours that I can fulfill contracts. And that was my limit. And when I tried to hire people, they weren't me. And that made me, and I think I'm a good teacher, and I'm not a good teacher, but I don't think that's true. It was just, I have certain specialized skills. That's what I was selling at the time. And then part of that was relationship management, right? Just the people know who I am. So what I did is I started doing a lot of side hustles. I started looking around for ways to get more value out of my homestead, because I had a homestead. I'm like, gosh, honey sells for a lot of money. Let's sell honey. And it does. I sell honey. I sell out of in 5 minutes every year when I post my honey for sale. That's in part because people know who I am, and they know the honey's good, and they know I don't even feed my bees sugar water. Like, if they die, they die. They are the most managed bees in the world. I'm pretty sure they do their thing, and every so often my buddy Ken comes over and helps me extract honey, which I'm now allergic to bee stings, so that's pretty important. And then that's it. In fact, the bees are leaving, but but it made sense at the time, and it was a really good profit center when I wasn't allergic to them. So, K-Bonk, I'm marking your question for answering afterwards, but that's a great question, and I have a good answer for you. So, this item for Operation Independence is a little different than usual. Usually I'm like, hey, we sold these things. Hey, we spent some money that's going to come back later, we hope. Hey, we avoided needing to pay a guy, so I didn't have to earn the money to pay a guy, and all of those things happen here. But I got an email on Sunday. You know what my email said? It was from my bank. My bank informed me that the 1.5% interest rate on my checking account is going up to 3%. In order to get the 3%, what I need to do is have 12 debit transactions a month and have one deposit every month, which of course I do in my checking account. That was it. And so I looked at the interest rates of everything else. And I don't know how you are, but when I first took on my financial gremlins, I did the thing where you get an emergency fund and you put it in a savings account, and it's separate from your checking account so you don't accidentally spend it. I did the thing where I pay myself first, and I do the 10% and the 10%. I did all of those things. As a result of this, I have several accounts at this bank that I can access all in one dashboard. And the different buckets of money are at different interest rates. So they're earning interest in those accounts, but they're not earning 3%. And I looked at that and I was like, that's how much is in my emergency fund. There's a second fund I have for a much bigger emergency that if I have to drop everything and fly across the country for, that's like a specific allocated different emergency. And then there's my savings account. And then there's another savings account for a different reason that it's personal, so I'm not going to go into it. So I had like 4 accounts with money sitting in it. And then I have my checking account I use for everything. And out of all those accounts, it's like more than 1.5% difference, 2% sometimes on what they're earning. And I was like, well, I'm gonna employ this tool called a pen. And I'm going to write down the 4 accounts and how much are in them, which I did. It's an even number for each. And I transferred it all into my checking account so I can earn 3% on it. And the deal is I have to reframe what 0 is on my checking account. So 0 is now a baseline number that I have written down. So I don't go below that number. Like if I'm below that number, then and I need to make a decision about, do I have enough money to buy a new cowboy hat, right? I don't have enough money to buy a new cowboy hat, even though this cowboy hat is not terribly expensive. And I realized this, not everybody's there to ready for a decision like that. Like some of us really need to have it in the different accounts or it's not going to work. But I've gotten to a point where I have enough of an emergency fund, enough income coming in, and enough discipline over my finances that I can now take advantage of this 3% thing on all my savings, which is the way it used to be when we had savings account. I was getting 4% in my savings account by doing nothing in the 90s. And then it all went away. It all, like in the 90s, it slowly went down and then that was it. So I'm actually kind of stoked because I can finally take advantage of money I need to have liquid, making decent interest. And while that's not enough money to, like make me a millionaire, every little bit counts. And I find that money management has been a journey. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. Like, you may not be in the place where I am right now ready for this. You may be well beyond me, where you're just like, why is that even a thing you need to talk about, right? We're all in different places. But I think the important thing about building the life you choose, one of the things is getting control of your finances and making them work for you rather than always chasing, always behind, always chasing backwards, always trying to figure out how to leverage this debt against that debt against that debt. That's the slave world. We don't want to live in the slave world. And so when you realize that, and then you look at where you are, many times it's horrifying, but it's also a step-by-step way out of it as you gain financial literacy. And the first step to gaining financial literacy is realizing that you need to. And then it takes time to implement it. You're building new habits. You're building better habits, right? So that's my thoughts on Operation Independence today. Okay, before we go into the main topic of today's show, I want to talk about winter break. Every year I take between Christmas and New Year off. And this year, because Christmas falls on a Saturday, and I wanted more than just 1 week off, today's my last full day of work. I am officially going into hibernation mode after today. However, I'm still working until Friday because there's a lot of year-end things I want to get done, mostly of clerical nature. Some of them are of the looking forward nature. And I want to make sure that time is uninterrupted, which is part of why the shows are stopping. But it's winter break, so we get special stuff at winter break. We have pre-recorded shows that are the reading of the poem the night before Christmas. And I think the first one comes out today, but it might come out tomorrow. I don't know yet because I haven't done the work I need to do for that. I'm doing that work right after the show. Of course, I have the live stream tomorrow. Other than that, I'm gone. Now, what does that mean for the show? Well, I promised you that we would do replays. And I promised you that we would focus back on the My Three Things thing because I haven't talked a lot about My Three Things in the last year. And part of that was I feel like I've said everything that needs to be said about My Three Things, but we have a lot of new podcast listeners. We're twice as big as we were last year. And that means you may not have ever heard an episode about My Three Things unless you went back and listened to them, or you listened to one of the replays this year. And so I decided I'm going to bring those back out so that you can listen to them when you're on your Christmas break, if you take one, or not, if you're working over Christmas and you're working and listening. It's a way to set a foundation going into your next year to take control and build a life you choose. And then I realized how long ago it was I started talking about My Three Things. And Tori says, I love hearing about My Three Things no matter how long I've been here. Well, you're going to hear about it again. What I decided is that instead of doing replays next week, part of what I'm doing the rest of this week is recording My Three Things, a series of My Three Things audio podcasts that will come out next week. So they will be pre-recorded. I will release them next week, and I'm readdressing My Three Things from the start. There will be 3 episodes. They will roll out automatically next week. And the idea is to take you on a journey from beginning to end. Even if you've been through this journey, use it to reevaluate what you want to do moving forward in your life. So we'll be doing that next week, which is more work, but for me, but I think it's worth doing it that way. And then I can kind of put them as a My Three Things primer on the website next year for people who come in, hear us talking about My Three Things on the show, and they're like, well, here are my 5 things. That's usually the first thing that happens, right? How could I fit 5 things into 3 things, which is the exact opposite point of My Three Things. So we'll be doing that next week, and they will roll out for you. And I also have an interview show that's already been recorded that will come out on the audio podcast that was a live recording. So if you follow me on YouTube, you've already seen it. If not, it'll be coming out next week. So that's what's going to happen there. I think, though, as I say this, it's important to get downtime sometimes. And, as we go into my main topic of the show, I'll talk a little bit about that and the word balance, which was one of my words before. This time that I take between Christmas and New Year, I'm usually accomplishing something for myself around the house as part of it. And I'm working on setting a foundation to go into January strong, because what I do in the first 3 months of 2023 tends to set the foundation for how the whole year goes. And so I want to do that right every year. And even though wintertime tends to be a slower time for a lot of people, homesteaders, we're not planting anything. It's almost time to start seedlings. It's also, if you have extra time, what are you using it for? Are you using it to just boink around, or are you using it to move yourself forward or to set that foundation? And what I always end up having is, I realize the end of the year is going to be frantic. These things are all coming to a head at the end of the year, no matter what I do. And part of that is by design. And if I'm going to do that well, I need foundation. And so I tend to set foundation in the first quarter of the year. In order to set foundation, I need to think about it. I think great when I'm working with my hands. So it actually works really well for me to be doing a house project, which is remodeling the bathroom this year, while I'm thinking in my head about it and blasting music or blasting podcasts or whatever. There's a lot going on there in my creative process. So I think it's important to get downtime. And if between Christmas and New Year's isn't your time, that's fine. Just choose a time. I've taking a second week or a second couple of days around June, actually, to say, okay, how have we done so far? Pause. Okay, what are we doing moving forward? So the break I took this year, though, was right before Self-Reliance Festival in June. And that was it was less of a breaky break than I wanted. So we'll time that better. I'm going to time that better in 2023. Anyway, that's the winter break. That's what the schedule is going to be like. I think it's totally worth me redoing some of these episodes. They may not be as long, so I'm not going to go a whole bunch of segments, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to basically just go straight into it. No sponsors, nothing. Just those tight episodes the way they need to be. And then we can look back at them over time. With that, it's time for the main topic of today's show. And the reason you're all here today, which is to hear my 2023 word of the year, and I hope you've chosen yours. You can share it as we go towards the end. We can start sharing each other's word of the year. But this is something I started talking about a little while ago. And if you've been following the podcast for a long time, you know how it kind of came in. Jenny Hill was somebody who brought in the concept, and it perfectly aligned with the My Three Things methodology I use for Pip and I is saying, what's the word? You don't get to hear till the end. It's the way it goes. It's the way it goes, right? We're gonna build up to it. So Jenny started changing her life, realized her life needed to change, and she came to the idea of a word of the year. And when she started sharing that in the network, everybody got really excited about it, including me. So that's the word of the year and where it came from. Now, no year has ever been as hard for me for finding the right word as this one right now. This has been, usually it's like pretty clear what my word is going to be. And I know it. And it's like, yep, that's the word, done. Boom. Nope. This year it was really, really hard, guys. And even last night, I went out to dinner and I'm sitting there like, my podcast has to be good tomorrow. It's the last one of the year. I mean, like, not that they don't all have to be good, but you know what I mean. What if you don't come back if my podcast sucked the last one of the year? And I don't even know what my word is. And, they were like, well, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I guess I'm going to decide by tomorrow. And I had the concept in mind, and I've had the concept in mind for the whole time. And part of the problem is that the concept I want, I wasn't finding a single one word for the word. And I was kind of resigning to myself, like maybe I'm going to have a 2-word word. And I thought, well, if it's one concept with 2 words, fine, I'll do it. But the 2-word option I had was not the full breadth of the concept I had in my head. And this is where language can bite you in the butt, guys. Like, sometimes I'll be like, there's a German word that means that, and there's no English equivalent, but that hasn't hit me yet. And that's okay. Then I'll just choose the German word. Now, I didn't have anything in any language that I know how to speak that would work for what I wanted this year. And the important thing, and the reason the word of the year works so well, is it's one word. You can write it on your wall. You can put it as the background on your computer. You can make it the screensaver on your phone, right? You can say it to yourself every day 10 times when you get up in the morning. And that's why it's so powerful. And if it's in alignment with where you need to go next, it's a very powerful tool. The flip side of the word of the year is often to get full learning and accomplishment from your word of the year, you end up having to experience the opposite of the word of the year. And we've seen some of that. So the reason I like to use it as a tool now is it's, I've got my life strategic plan. I have strategies under them, under which I'm working towards goals. And it's a life plan, not a business plan for me. It includes business, but I am building a lifestyle business so that when I quote unquote retire, my work is still my work, right? In other words, my work is my life, but not in a stupid, toxic sort of workaholic way, but my life becomes my work. That's the goal. That's part of my goal, so that it's not one and then flip the other. Now, other people operate a different way, and that's fine. That's their choice. They do a job that's a job that they're going to do for a certain amount of time. They're going to retire and then they're free. I choose to be free now. And that's my choice. And that means lifestyle plan rather than business plan for me. So the word of the year really helps focus on, one of those. Back's a little sore today. As I move forward, and it's a very, as I said, it's a great tool for focusing, and you're more likely to accomplish it if you can keep it in mind and focus on it. So one word makes me super happy because I'm all about cutting the chaff, right? So past words I've had are grow. What I learned from grow is that it's up to me, and it's a choice whether I grow or not. And that was in 2020. The first thing that happened in 2020 is my business went to zero because of shutdowns and this little pandemic thing that we had that started. And it was funny because I had all these plans. I was like going to go to our coffee farm. I went to Rogue Food and I sponsored them with some coffee, and I was going to get out and all of these things to grow. And it was like, woo. And I think my second or third or something year of the spring workshop. It was the third. And I was all excited about that growing. And then, woo. And I ended up having to delay it because we had some hotel shutdown things happening here. And I wasn't confident that people could fly here and actually retain their hotel reservations. So we moved it to June, but I did it anyway. And when I did it in June, people were still saying we shouldn't get together and see each other because we'll kill each other. None of us died. None of us died in 2020. After that whole event, I realized it's a really hard environment right now to grow a business. It's the perfect time. Let's do it. And I said, F it. And I grew that year. Boy, did I grow. Boy, did I work hard growing. And it got good results, and I'm happy about it. So then the next year I was like, man, boy, did I work hard. I like my dogs. I like to walk my dogs. I'm looking at my dog right now next to my desk, asleep on her little bed. Oh, the life of a dog. And I thought, well, I need a little more balance in life. So my next word was balance. And I learned a lot from balance. And the first thing I learned was how to be out of balance. So if you want balance, you need boundaries. Balance and boundaries. I probably should have chosen the word boundaries that year, but I learned all about boundaries. Jenny lent me a book on boundaries, and it was all these things. I lost the book on boundaries because I didn't have any, and then I found it again, like all of those things. And that was my big lesson for boundaries. And then I didn't quite feel done with boundaries at the end of the year. Not boundaries, but balance at the end of the year. But I decided to move on to a really important word that I think I needed to do. And that was this year. That was courage. Now, you may not hear me or see me do things and think she doesn't have courage. But I didn't have enough courage. I needed to remind myself to have courage and to be confident through things and to not waver. And it's a choice. It's just like grow. It's a choice. And one of the things I learned with the word courage was the word no. It goes back to boundaries now, doesn't it? It kind of solidifies that whole balance thing. Boy, was I not in balance this year. Letting go of insecurities takes courage. You may not think I have insecurities, but I'm a human being. Of course I have insecurities, guys. And I learned that sooner is better. Handling things, addressing problems is better the sooner you do it. If you wait a long time because you don't have the courage to take them head on, then they get worse. They get worse. So that was this year. I strove for more this year. I worked harder. I played harder. I undid every lesson I learned about from the word balance, by the way, with the word courage. And I grew my business. Yay! I grew my business. I made it over some really important personal humps, one of which was huge, which was increasing cash flow to where I could finally take some money out of my business to pay myself. And I know a lot of you have been following me for a long time. I've always covered my bills, right? But I've never taken any slight extra anything out of my businesses. I've always reinvested it back into businesses. And by going into this year, I was feeling pretty sick of that situation. Like, I don't know, can I afford to buy underwear this month or not? That's a good question, right? Stuff like that, where like the money was there, but I really needed to reinvest it to set the foundations, right? And this year I got to where I was able to afford my really expensive dog who's asleep next to me when she got hurt because I had better cash flow and I didn't have to put that on a credit card, which would be a terrible financial decision, although I probably would have to save her life, right? And that was a big thing for me because I was starting to wonder if I was ever going to get to the point where it was anything other than just reinvest in the business all the time. That doesn't mean I don't still reinvest in my business. It's very important to do that if you're growing a business. The last 5 years building this podcast and building Hollow Roast Coffee, it hasn't been like a super instant success story, guys. Sometimes I think it looks like an instant success story from the outside. But I was building Hollow Roast before I decided I wanted it to be a business just because I like roasting coffee. I was selling at the farmer's market. That was a lot of work. I realized that was more work than I wanted to do, and mail order was a better choice. The podcast started out like every podcast. I had 80 listeners on my first episode. I had 14 listeners on my second episode. We're at 2,500 listeners now, guys. Woohoo! And that's 5 years. You hear other podcasts that go from 0 to 100,000 in 5 years. And mine has just been a slow, steady build. The difference between my listeners and a lot of the listeners to the ones that went faster is that I have listeners who stay. I have listeners who interact with me. And I have you all are like a strong family of people who work together in a very different way than fast growth where there's a lot of churn. And that was with intention. When I was growing the podcast, I'm like, I want to grow quality network partners, basically, as listeners, rather than just add as many as I can so I can sell ads. What that means is that when we add an advertiser, which I'm also very careful about who advertises on the podcast, it was really fun adding sponsorship this month. That means they're more likely to be complementary to the kind of advertisers we've added, which is good. That means it's good for the advertiser. It's good for the people hearing about the opportunities that the advertisers present. And what will never be is a podcast where every 10 minutes you have a stupid commercial. I'm willing to grow up to 2 sponsors per show, and that's it. That's up 10 sponsors. I released 5 spots in December, and they sold immediately. right? And that's because of that slow growth. So it looks like they sold immediately. No, it took me 5 years to be in a position where when I released sponsorship opportunities, they would sell. And I hadn't done it earlier because I was afraid we didn't have enough listeners to be of benefit to my sponsors. And I think it's important that that's mutually beneficial. The coffee business, while it technically made a profit in air quotes that could pay me, it made more sense to invest it back into the company. And so I have taken out the bare minimum, which is $1,500 a month to pay myself to deal with, mortgage, food, electricity, health share. $1,500 a month has been the number. And that's it. And everything else has gone back into, that's between living free in Tennessee or the podcast or websites I built or consulting sessions I do, all of that. Everything else has gone back in to build it. So what that has looked like, $1,500 is actually quite a lot of money to live on. But some of you who have rents that are higher than that are like, I don't know how you did it. Well, I did it because I live on a homestead. It doesn't cost that much to pay every month, right? My mortgage is not $1,500 a month. I don't have property where I live. We don't have property taxes that are don't have property taxes that are crazy. So it was totally doable. Part of that was by choices I've made where, as far as location. And I also, while you did hear that I went out to dinner last night, I cut out pretty much all extras of that variety that cost money, except for once or twice a year, I did build in that I can go do something fun, and we'll talk about some of that later. So it's not, I'm not unhappy with how the last 5 years have been. I have had really good times. I have made some great relationships. I've done a lot of fun things, and I've learned how to do a lot of fun things that don't cost money, like hiking and mushroom hunting. I love doing those things. Swimming, kayaking, like that doesn't cost money. Once you get the kayak, it doesn't cost money, or you rent a kayak and that's not all that expensive, in the grander scheme of things. So there are lots of things you can do to have fun. And I think you have more fun when you embrace that it doesn't have to cost money to have fun, right? So that's what it's really been like. And I probably should share that more because I think people see me as like this instant success, and it was not. It's 5 years, and I'm not sure I'd even use the word success now. I mean, I feel successful because I have the life I want, and that's success to me. Not a billionaire, not even a millionaire yet. I'd like to be a millionaire at some point. But definitely very happy to have moved the needle from one point, which was over here. The needle was dependent on, even though I worked for myself, basically dependent on a job to live, like a job of the kind that, I got to go to work Monday, right? I had to reframe that to, I get to go to work Monday so I can earn the money so I can do the things I want to do long term. And then I reframe that to, well, I guess I want to get money from somewhere else now. So I started doing that. To, my income is generated from things I love doing. Therefore, my job doesn't feel like a job most of the time, except for when I'm doing my taxes. It totally feels like a job when I'm doing the clerical stuff. But you know what I mean? Like, so it's moved that needle for me. And that means I'm happy every day. Well, I mean, we all get depressed sometimes, all right? We feel depression sometimes. You know what I mean? I'm basically, I look forward to doing what I do. And that's great. And I get money for it. Yay! It's like double bonus. So courage kind of whipped my butt this year in a lot of ways because it made me do all the hard things. And some of the things it made me do that were hard for me that aren't hard for other people, but they're a whole lot less hard for me than they were before, is I learned how to say no. Now, Tactical, upon hearing this, is going to be like, no, you didn't. You worked, like, you went to every event ever. I'm like, yeah, because that was part of the grow plan. That was part of the business, right? But I learned to say no to things I was doing to earn money, but that are distractions from my primary objectives. And in the last 5 years, the two things I wanted to build were this podcast, which has coaching services with it, and the coffee business. And what I was also doing was this and this and this and this, including website development, which I'm good at, and web design, which I'm good at, and it makes money really quickly, which means then I can afford to put the time into the podcast that makes less money per hour. And this year, very early on, I was like, I need to start saying no to websites. And what I started doing was referring them to web developers I know who are good at websites who do that full time. Because what was happening is I was building a site. It was taking me an awful lot of time to get it done because I also have the other 2 jobs, which I didn't feel like was good customer service to people who wanted websites from me. And so these guys get them done a lot faster than I do. So might as well just refer them out. And that meant I had that time back. And now that could mean go read a novel on the couch, which I do sometimes. That's one of my downtime activities. Or I could use that time to do something I loved. And that's part of why I was able to dedicate time to growing Self-Reliance Festival into what it's become. In fact, this year I want it to become even more this next year. It's already 2023 in my head, but to do that, to have that time, I had to say no to things that might earn money, but were ultimately distractions. And that's polar opposite of when I was side hustling all the things all the time. I had to address conflicts head on. And that means doing the hard thing, which is saying, this thing that's happening is not working. Bye-bye. Or this thing that's happening, we need to talk about it and figure out if we can change it because it's not working. Or this employment relationship, it's got to go, right? This alliance that we have, not working. We've got to dissolve it. Like all of those, it's addressing conflict head on. You called me a poopy head online. That's not okay. That actually happened. I did get called a poopy head at least once or twice this year. And I didn't come out swinging, punching in the nose, but I was like, no, you can't talk to me that way. It's not going to work. And I think this may actually be a gender thing, or it might be a how I was raised thing, where letting conflict slide and subtly trying to change it was the way I was taught. And that does not work. Because half the time when you do that, people don't understand what you're hinting at, because hinting at things is not very clear. And somebody may be doing something that needs to be addressed and it's conflict and they don't know they're doing it until you tell them. And then like, oh, I'll stop doing that. And then they move on with life. Where, in former years, I would have spent 5 years over analyzing why. Jen says women are taught to be nice. I'm less nice now. That's okay. It's funny because I had such an emotional response when I was targeted by people who like really are into Al Gore because we exposed his energy use, and I was the female at the organization. So they, they were like, that's the weak point, so we'll attack her. That really hurt. If that ever happens to me again with anybody, where I become the target of all that, the stalkers and the calls and the letters and calling me a whore and all the things they did, threatening to shoot me, threatening to rape me, all of the things the progressives will do when you piss them off. I won't feel a thing, but I needed to go through the emotions of feeling the thing to get over it. And that's the same thing with addressing conflict head on. Is the first couple of times it was like, okay, I'm going to take a week of overthinking this. I'm going to build up to it. And then I'm going to say the thing. I didn't just like do what I used to do, which was let it go, let it go, let it go, let it go, and then explode into a giant nuclear explosion that causes the person to be vaporized because I'm so mad. Because that's what I used to do. And that's not good. After they didn't get the hint, because hints don't work, guys. I learned to openly admit weakness. And part of that was understanding that I am better at some things and less good at other things. And that's okay. So I'm not good at that. Don't make me do it. Right? If you want me to remember freeway exits by their numbers, you are a pipe dreamer. You can go away. I'm not going to remember that it is exit 62. It's very likely that I will remember it's exit 62 and then look for exit 26 because I reverse numbers. I'm really good at it. Now, it doesn't mean I won't try to remember the number, but I have to have something else besides the number. Tactical knows this because I frustrate him when I'm like, you mean the Jackson exit? And he's like, exit 273 or whatever. I'm going to laugh if that's the right number. Probably is not the right number, though. It's probably in the 280s range or 290s based on mileage. I mean, I don't even understand how they work. It's just like my weakness is that. That's one of the biggest things I've had to overcome when it comes to clerical work for the companies is I'm really good at estimating what a calculation should be, mathematically speaking. It'll be like, it's going to be around $57 or whatever. And then when I reverse the numbers, entering them into a spreadsheet or something, and it's not $57, it's $757, I immediately know that something's wrong because that's nowhere near what I thought it would be. And then I go back and I find the reverse numbers. And anyway, that's one of my weaknesses. And openly admitting weaknesses and then using the first skill, which is saying no, is really helpful. Like, wow, you really don't want me fixing your brakes on your car, man. Even though you just asked me to, because I'm not very good at that. And brakes are important, right? So openly admitting weaknesses took courage because you're making yourself vulnerable into somebody thinking you're stupid, and that doesn't feel good. Well, I also learned to stand my ground. And there were several pretty big challenges to standing my ground in times when it was important for me to stand my ground. And it was so funny going into them because I had already decided to stand my ground. I work with my mom, Mama Sauce, and she's like, you're just going to roll over and let them screw you over, aren't you? Like you always do. And I'd say no. And then 10 minutes later, she'd say the same thing. And I'd say, no, not going to do that. And then she would overhear me standing my ground and she'd be like, you actually stood up for yourself. I was like, yeah, we're done. I mean, in some ways, I've always stood up for myself, right? But in other ways, I've rolled. And I'm not going to roll anymore when it's unnecessary. And that took courage. The hard one was that I learned to build some of my natural talents from good to great. And that may sound like a really egotistical thing to say, but I'm a really good presenter. That's why you listen to my podcast. And if you bring me to an event, I give a really good presentation. I give much better presentations at this time in the year over January a year ago. And that's because I was like, you know what? I have a talent. I have a natural ability to teach. I have a natural ability to present well. And I can turn like naturally talented musicians often don't try very hard and they're good and you like them. And you're like, man, if they applied themselves, just imagine what they could be. And I was like, that's me with presentations. I've depended on my natural ability to present. I mean, I've worked over the years on making it better, but I've depended on my natural ability to present because I have it, like my natural ability to facilitate rooms, right? What if I actually applied myself? What if I actually applied myself and tried to be the greatest presenter at that conference? And so I did. And people who saw me present this year were like, holy cow. I mean, this started a little bit before, like, I think it was October a year ago that I started realizing I need to apply myself better and differently. And I was looking at great presenters online and learning from what they did and changing how I organized what I do. I looked at what Joel Salatin does because I was like, I need to organize myself differently to present well. And I was lucky enough to have been at a few events with him this year that I could see how he operates. And it was a big learning thing for me. And it worked. It worked. And I became unapologetic. And that goes back to standing my ground. I used to just to diffuse the conflict of a situation, just I'm sorry, but this is blah, blah, blah. I'm not sorry. It's not even sorry, not sorry. Sometimes I say that jokingly, but I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry that I've worked hard and my business can actually pay me more than $1,500 a month now. And that we are on the precipice of doing even better. I'm not sorry about that. I'm not sorry when somebody says that they're having a hard time that I'm not right there with them. I'm sorry for them that they're having a hard time. And I know that having hard times set the foundation to do better. And so I'm supportive, unless they're vampiring me, but I'm supportive of that, of them, getting better. I've even helped people out of situations, but I'm not sorry for my own success. And people try to make me sorry for it sometimes, and that's dumb. I'm unapologetically thrilled that my businesses, after 5 years of hard work, are doing well. And I want them to do better next year and the year after and the year after, right? I love this community. My businesses would not be doing well without this community. I want to see the community thrive. I want to see every single one of you be successful. Because when our network is successful, we're all successful together. And there's so much we can learn from each other to get there. So that's all courage. And where that's led me is that I'm able to prioritize things that are important to me on the non-business side, like putting the food forest in for my 50th birthday. I didn't go into the beginning of the year knowing I was going to do that. I realized I could do that. I prioritize something that's important to me that has nothing really to do with coffee business, right? It has something to do with the podcast because I can talk to you about it, but it's also not like foundational to the podcast necessarily. But it's very foundational to this homestead doing well. It's going to feed animals, it's going to feed humans, and it's a thing of beauty. It's a place where peace can be had. Another thing that I'm prioritizing that's important is my bathroom's going to be redone, even though it's not the most important thing to be fixed on the homestead right now. Because I hate that when I clean the floor, it looks dirty. That's literally the motivator. And I hate that when I scrub the tub, the porcelain's so old that it doesn't ever turn white. Yuck. You know, I'll be selling a very old clawfoot tub that needs recoating, by the way, after this thing is done. In case anybody wants to recoat one, I got one that's already recoated that I'm going to put in its place. I've prioritized going to the symphony less. I like going to the symphony, by the way. I prioritize going to the symphony less, and here's why. Tickets for box seats cost twice as much. So if I choose the one I really want and spend twice the money and go half the number of times, I can sit in box seats. You know what that means? None of the elbows. What's happening to our population as we get fatter is the seats at the symphony that are the same size don't always house the full person. And so if you're in the middle of the center, you can be between two very round people, and it is a lot less pleasant to have. It's kind of like being on an airplane at that point. And in the box, the seats are bigger and there are fewer of them, and they're only twice as expensive. So I go half the number of times because I know what's important to me, and I have the courage to admit why I don't like those other seats. And that may seem really frou-frou, but I'm unapologetic about it because I don't care. I'm looking forward to seeing. I'm going to go to a symphony show in January. That I made that. I was like looking at it, and I was like, "Yep, Am I sending 65 or 125? Spending 125. It's not even that. I mean, like, it's not like it's $70,000 for that seat, right? Prioritizing things like taking a hike. Yesterday, I had no time to take a hike, right? Did I take a hike? Yes. I got up in the morning, and I haven't really prioritized hiking in the woods, and it's the best time of year to hike in the woods right now. It was actually the best time of year right after, like in all those days of no rain that we had this fall when it was a little cooler, best time to hike in the woods. And I was busy working on all the, like the food forest event, all the events, all the presentations, all of the coffee. And I was like, I love hiking. I haven't made time to hike this year. And I got up, and there's a meeting we have just about every morning in the holler. It's called the What You Gonna Do Today meeting. And we go over priorities, and, Tactical does his things. I do my things. And I was like, I'm going for a hike. You can come with me if you want to. It's totally not a priority, but it's happening. And he's like, yeah, I'll go. And so I did. And it had to be scheduled at a certain time in the day for it to happen. But I prioritized it by putting it on the schedule, and it was awesome. And then I've been able to prioritize relationship better by the end of the year. I will say earlier in the year, up until about mid-November, I tried hard with relationships, but it was very hard to invest time in relationships because I was dealing with all of the things courage put up across my path. And by the end of the year, I'm like, I need to have the courage to prioritize time to actually talk to people I like. And so we started doing game night and some other stuff here. And I will continue on that journey as we go into the next word of the year. So I'm going to tell you what words I did not choose this year. What words I did not choose, because I have more opportunities than I've ever had before. I am singing rock and roll again, which means more time spent singing. And I am poised in my businesses for some pretty rapid growth, which is darn cool if I take advantage of the opportunities in the right way. So the word or the concept I had in my mind going into this year, you ready for it, guys? You ready? I mean, I've put it off for like over an hour now. You still don't know my word of the year. You're probably like throwing your hammer at your computer screen right now, all mad. Step change. It's like, this is the year of step change. What's step change, you ask? Change happens when you grow a business. You have to change. Step change isn't just a little change. It's a change that results in big, explosive growth. Another way to put it is 10x. My friend John Bush over at Live Free Academy, he says 10x. How are we going to 10x this, Nicole? And then he learned a little lesson about that when he tried to 10x too many things at once. He's like, never mind, I didn't 10x any of it because I didn't give it the proper attention. And the problem with step change and 10x is that it doesn't have balance. So I did not choose those words, Jen. That's the concept. So what could I do? What could I do to bring balance in? And I realized I had to visualize what's going on for me right now. There's a glass ceiling above me, and I keep running into it. I need to break that glass ceiling. It's not okay to have it there. And it's not due to my gender. It's not like the glass ceiling that girls have in corporations that people talk about. It's not because of my background. It's not because of my level of education or my mental state or any condition I may or may not have right now that's there. It's not because of what anybody thinks of me that this glass ceiling is here. It's there because I put it there. It's my fault that there's a glass ceiling. It's my mindset. It's my perception of what is possible that has created a glass ceiling. It's my hangups. It's my weird hangups about not wanting to cut my hair or whatever. This glass ceiling is of my own making. And once I realized it was there and that it's of my own making, I realized this: the worst part of making your own glass ceiling is that you can see through it. And when you can see through a glass ceiling, you can see what's on the other side of the glass ceiling, right? You can see through it. And there's lots of reasons why I have put it there. And every one of the reasons why I have a glass ceiling is a freaking excuse. And you know how I feel about excuses. Excuses can screw off with a capital F. But I'm making this a PG show so that we can all all listen to it in front of our things. People in the comments are saying hammer. Is that my word? The other side of that glass ceiling, guys, it looks great. It looks like exactly where I want to go. I want to be on the other side of that glass ceiling. Therefore, the glass ceiling needs to be broken. It needs to be broken. And the cool thing about glass is glass breaks. Even tempered glass breaks. My glass ceiling is not tempered glass. I can guarantee you that. It's nowhere near that safe. We don't do safe glass ceilings, but it needs to be broken. It will break. And 2023 is the year I am going to break that glass ceiling that I made for myself. It's the year I break it. I'm going to use whatever I can to break that ceiling, guys. If it takes a hammer, Letty, I'm going to use the hammer. If it's my bare hands, I'm going to use my bare hands. I am going to rhinoceros through the effing thing. I'm going to rhinoceros through my glass ceiling. I'll use my head if I have to. I'm going to do whatever it takes. And for every word, there's a flip side, right? And that's the sharp shards of that glass ceiling are probably going to hurt me in a place or two. I expect that to happen. I'm not going into this word blind. So my word of the year, which encompasses a couple of things. One is that step change for me and for my businesses. Jenny says it's rhinoceros. It encompasses that, the step change side, and moving beyond my self-made constraints. Okay, because I've made the glass ceiling. Those are my constraints. They are perceived constraints, though. They aren't actually real. They're not real. And I realize that. This world also prioritizes some balance and priority to my spirit, my body, and my heart. Because without that, I don't want the step change. I want myself to enjoy it. I want myself to be part of the step change. So my word for 2023 has already been guessed by one of you, which is not a surprise. It's breakthrough. It's my breakthrough year. That's what we're looking for in 2023. And I don't know exactly how that's going to go. I don't know exactly what the opposite of breakthrough is going to be. I've already started working on this word before it was a word. I have some things already in motion right now, and you're going to see them in early January as we come off of the break, right? It's breakthrough. Guys, if you have a word of the year and you're in the comments, definitely share them. I am going to hang on after recording this episode to answer the question I have. So this is my last non-interview podcast, as I said at the beginning. And then I go on winter break. I redo my bathroom. I set the foundation for the really cool breakthrough things that we're starting to do in January. Rather than the usual closing, I want to leave you with something different than make it a great week. And that's this. Make it a great break. Make it a great break. I see some words in the comments. Sorry, that was the end of the podcast, by the way. It wasn't the usual buy my coffee thing. Stability for Jen. That's a good one. Confidence for Letty. Love it. Definitely. Those of you who shared words, let us know if you don't know your word yet. I hope by the end of hearing all of those episodes I record going into next week, you will have an idea of what your word should be. And you do not need to wait. If you don't have a word by the end of the year, whatever. If you get one in mid-January, you don't have to wait a whole year to start. You can start at any time in the year. In fact, I think we have a few people who start their words of the year in October. So streamline, good word, Lee. I love it. I love these words you guys are choosing. And I'm ready for a breakthrough year, so it's going to be awesome. Okay, now back to the question I had in the middle of the show, which I'd already moved beyond the recipes. K-Bonk says, thickeners other than flour or cornstarch. Thickeners other than flour or cornstarch. Now, I saw somebody said cauliflower, flour, and some other things. Zucchini flour works great too. Progress. I love it. Grateful. I love it. Mona, still looking for it. You'll find it, Mona. The way I like to thicken gravy is to make gravy custard. And so I heat up the broth and I separate yolks from whites and eggs, and I beat them and I drizzle in a little bit of the broth while beating it. And it ends up making, like you would make pudding. That's what you can do with milk. It ends up making a thicker gravy-like thing that's more like meat custard. It does not have flour in it. If you make pudding that way, you're supposed to put the flour with the milk. I've never tried it without the milk, but it does. It custardizes it and makes it thicker, which is really cool. So anyway, what's the link to your coaching calendar, Nicole? Tori, email me, Nicole@livingfreeintennessee.com, and I will send you that link. Right now, I do not have the link public because I like to talk to people before we do coaching, because if I cannot help you in coaching, I don't want you to pay me for coaching. So I think I can help you, and I will send that to you privately. Gelatin. I've never used that. That's good. Thanks, Tori. Anyway, I'm really excited about the word of the year. It's been a really hard journey this year. I've cried a lot. I've laughed a lot. I've been very worried a lot. I haven't slept much, but all in all, I'm happy with where the year went. I'm happy with everything we did. Renee, fearless, love it, Renee. And I'm glad my dog made it past her horrible injury. I've also really learned a lot about wound care this year. I'm actually, this is funny. I'm going to cook sheep testicles and try them. That's going to take some courage, but I got the testicles from the sheep, and I've been looking up how we're going to do it. Contentment will be a good word for you. Yeah, that's good. That's a great one. If you're not feeling content, but there's no reason not to be content, that's a really good word. So I'm looking forward to a breakthrough year, making a lot of different decisions, and it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. I think Tactical's probably like stabbing himself in the eye right now, but he probably already knew my word because he heard me like step change. Break out. I actually break out was on the list at one point, and I was like, no, it's like sounds like I'm getting out of jail. It kind of feels like I'm getting out of jail. When I break through that glass ceiling, man, it's going to be freeing. And freedom's a choice. Freedom's a choice. Anyway, thank you guys for joining the live stream. Audio podcast will be out later today. Don't forget, it's been a FUBAR year. Yeah, job security is questionable for many of us. Some of us don't know it yet. And that's scarier. That's scarier. Anyway, I'll be live tomorrow, 12:30 with John Willis. And it'll be a pretty good darn live stream, I think. As I said, it's a little out of my area of expertise, which is actually good for me because I'll learn a bunch on this one. Maybe we'll even get another speaker for Self-Reliance Festival. That'd be cool. I think he might be a good speaker for Self-Reliance Festival. We'll see. We'll see what he thinks. See how we get along on the live stream. See you guys on the other side of the break. Don't forget, as much as we like to be productive, it's productive to invest in your relationships. And I know I'm going to spend some time. I mean, I'm a little sad I don't get to go see my nieces and everybody, but I looked at plane tickets. It's $1,200 for me to go, and I spent $250 on a round trip ticket a little later in January. So I decided to make the right financial decision on that one. But don't forget to invest in important relationships if you have downtime and can. And if one of those important relationships is yourself, do that. It's okay, right? But it's also okay to take the time to spend with your loved ones, even if it's doing something you wouldn't usually do, like watching a football game, right? Which some of you probably love watching football games. It is a non-productive use of my time to watch football. Sometimes I do it anyway because the people around me love doing it, and I'm really just spending time with them. And that's a good thing. And for those of you who go into the holidays with dread, I feel for you. I also ask you, is there a way you can reframe that? Is there a boundary you need to set? Is there a way you can reframe it to make it a better time for you? You don't have to be all whatever, you don't have to do all your traditions or anything, but if you can find a way to reframe that sets your framework for reframing lots of negative things in your life. And that can make a huge difference for you as you move into your future. So thanks for joining the live stream, guys. I will see you